Why is it that people from China, Japan, Korea, Singapore, and Taiwan don't seem to succeed as much in Silicon Valley? Like, not as much as the Indian folks, for example. Let's take a closer look and try to figure that out. So I went ahead and requested funding from the company, got about 200 grand. Over the next 3 months, we brought in a professor, a consultant, and an executive coach, and we had a bunch of discussions. After those 3 months, I came to a conclusion about why this is happening. And today I want to share 3 key reasons.
It's a really well-known organization even in Korea. You mentioned it briefly earlier. DeepMind. Originally it was based in the UK and Google Brain ended up acquiring it, right?
Yeah, that's right. There were only about 60 people at the time. They didn't even have a company website. We basically just bought the team, and the price was a little over $770 million.
People remember Lee Sedol now as the last human to beat AlphaGo, but at the time, it really felt like a crushing defeat for humanity. And when DeepMind, who built that system, got acquired, it wasn't just some company quietly doing its own thing. I heard it actually went on to change Google's entire culture. And you were part of Google Brain back then, right?
Yes, I was the HR for that team at the time.
Oh, then how did you help shape things that way?
So back then, there were 2 types of HR. One was local HR, which was based in London, and the other was functional HR, more focused on supporting the team's actual work. So yeah, he was originally from that company. After the acquisition, he became a Google employee and stayed in London. Meanwhile, I was part of functional HR, specifically for Google Brain. So my role was more like stepping in for key meetings or helping out when there were broader company-wide strategy discussions. In that sense, we were working together as one team. One of the most surprising moments was when Demis Hassabis, the leader of the team, brought all 60 members to Silicon Valley right after the acquisition. They all came together, and on that very first day, they did a demo. I don't know if you've seen it. It was that breakout game where the AI learns how to play. They showed how the system was trained, and within just a few hours, it had mastered the entire game. Watching that learning process unfold in real time, it was like a gut punch to the 1,000-something geniuses already working at Google Brain. Like, wait, these guys can do that? It was a moment that really showed the raw power of AI. So stepping outside of Google's traditional focus on search and ads, I saw this as moving into a whole new territory, what I'd call Horizon 3 in the Horizon 1, 2, 3 framework. That's really the 3rd stage in a company's growth. I believe it opened the door to a completely new platform. It pushed us to take on new kinds of challenges and really experience firsthand how this next generation of talent could reshape the organization. So from there, we had to seriously think about how to develop and support them from an HR perspective. A lot changed, especially around how we structured compensation. You just can't treat these people like your average engineer.
Is it more advanced?
Yeah, definitely. It wasn't just a higher level. It was a whole different scale financially too. I remember we had a lot to think about back then.
Oh, so DeepMind is still mainly based in the UK these days?
Yeah, DeepMind itself is still based in the UK, and now it operates as a separate subsidiary under Alphabet. So it's no longer just part of Google. Alphabet's like the parent company, with Google as the G, and DeepMind as the D, so to speak. They're more separated from a business structure standpoint now.
So it's not directly under Google anymore, but one of the companies under Alphabet now.
In a way, that's part of Google's next phase business strategy. Google itself is already a traditional industry now. It's hard to drive real innovation from there. And if you tie truly innovative ventures too closely to that core business, you end up stifling them. It's kind of like why so many task forces in Korea ended up failing. These kinds of ventures usually play out over 30, 40 years at least. For example, Calico's mission is to make humans live forever. Realistically, their final product won't come out until around 2047. Until then, it's all about ongoing investment and development. But Google is still an ad company at its core. It evaluates performance every 3 months, and for sales teams, incentives are tied to those same quarterly cycles. If you judge these people by the usual 3-month evaluation cycle, it ends up looking like they're doing nothing. And that's where the tension starts. From a Korean business perspective, it's like we're putting in $15 million, $23 million, even $77 million into these teams, and now our bonuses are shrinking because of it. That creates conflict. So the solution is separation. You split it off, give them the space to work at their own pace, evaluate them differently, and reward them in a way that fits their model. That's what makes it work. And why does that matter to Google? Because if these teams succeed over the long term, the payoff can be enormous. These guys basically represent what Google could look like 30 years from now. They're a tool for realizing that long-term vision. And that's where the whole 10x idea comes back in. Google's already so big that even if it grows, it's by 10%, maybe 20 or 50%. But with these kinds of teams, if they take off, the growth could be in the tens of thousands of percent.
But that sounds incredibly hard. Just breaking down silos between departments is tough enough. And DeepMind isn't even a department, it's a whole separate company. But still, they've managed to influence things like Google's search results and other major areas. That kind of impact must come down to communication, right? I imagine you had to come up with a lot of strategies or ideas to help bridge that gap between teams.
That's where OKRs become really important. Of course, not every team uses them, like Waymo, for example, which is known for not using OKRs. But even if they don't formally use OKRs, they still have goals. And what we do is align those goals. That's what we call shared OKRs. So even though each team has its own role, like engineering, marketing, or sales, and what they do day to day is different, the mission they're given is the same. Make this a success. That shared goal gets passed down to the heads of each team. In that case, they will be less likely to devour each other or experience cannibalism at critical moments. So they sometimes supplement those aspects with organizational management techniques.
So it's about sharing the goal.
Right, the goal becomes shared, exactly. Each team does different tasks, but they're working toward one goal. If that breaks down due to conflict, both sides lose. That's the mindset we reinforce.
Oh, I asked about DeepMind too. There are a lot of brilliant developers there. You must have come across so many geniuses during your time at Google.
The biggest genius would probably be Jeff Dean. If you look him up, you'll see he's often referred to as the god of engineers. If you look into the legends surrounding Jeff Dean, you'll find examples like this. For instance, as a joke, he suddenly doubled the productivity of Google's servers. Since Google has so many servers, even a small increase in productivity can lead to huge profits. Someone noticed that the productivity had suddenly doubled. They tried to figure out why, but couldn't find the cause. Then, as they were passing by Jeff Dean's desk, they were shocked to find the answer. What was it? Turns out, Jeff Dean had switched his keyboard from USB 1.0 to USB 2.0. He typed so fast that the machine couldn't keep up with him, but once it switched from USB 1.0 to 2.0, the productivity doubled. Just like that, Google's enormous productivity doubled too. Of course, it's hard to say if that's literally true, but it shows just how much of a genius he is. Basically a godlike figure.
Google sure knows how to spin a good yarn.
More. And here's another example. At the end of the year, we usually go on a ski trip, mostly to Tahoe. We rented a bus, and it's about a 4-hour ride. One engineer opened his laptop the moment he got on and just kept typing. And by the time we got off, he had a fully working game. There are people who fit this description, but this particular person had never been a manager before, at least not until the year before I became his HR rep. He always worked alone. This is someone who realistically ranks between number 3 and 5 at Google, a truly extraordinary individual, but he's never had a team. He always worked entirely by himself.
Sounds like 1 against 100.
It's more than 100 to 1. He's exceptional. That's why for people like him, we create career tracks that don't burden them with managerial responsibilities, so they can fully focus on what they excel at. For example, in a newspaper or any media outlet, you might have an amazing reporter, a senior journalist. It wouldn't make sense to tell them, okay, now you manage the organization.
Exactly.
Right? That's why tech companies often have positions called fellows, specifically designed for these exceptional individuals. The idea is, don't worry about managing people, just focus on your work, your writing, your expertise. In reality, this often creates even greater value for the organization.
Have you only seen geniuses like Jeff Dean? When you've encountered people like that, how did you feel?
Well, besides Jeff Dean, there's also Ray Kurzweil. He was leading Calico, the project I mentioned earlier. Many people consider him the greatest genius since Edison. I actually worked closely with him and have immense respect for him. There's an interesting story I recall. I was always so fascinated by him. He composed film scores, invented the Kurzweil synthesizer, wrote movie scripts, just an incredibly divergent thinker. I was curious, so after lunch I asked him, Ray, what kind of person are you? What makes you so special? And he said he honestly didn't think he was special. It seemed like he was being humble, but he's also quite elderly, almost 70 years old now. Anyway, I asked him, everyone calls you a genius, so was it something you were born with? One of the things he said that still sticks with me is that he didn't feel like he did anything particularly special. Instead, he mentioned that from the time he could remember, around 4 or 5 years old, he had a really strong bond with his mother. What stands out the most to me is that he lived near Boston, and after meals he would walk along a little path with his mother, holding her hand. For hours he'd ask her all the things he was curious about, and his mother would listen to him all the way through. If there was something she didn't know, they would go and study it together. He said this started when he was around 4 or 5, especially during meals at the dinner table. He believes that this was the one thing that really set him apart from others and helped him. It wasn't just about doing his job well or being great at coding or engineering. Their interests are incredibly diverse. When you listen to them, they talk about things like human rights issues in Afghanistan, politics, the Middle East, Africa, just a wide range of topics. The person I respect the most, Ray Kurzweil, for example, created something called the Singularity University in the US. The singularity here refers to the concept of the technological singularity, the point where technology evolves beyond human control. It's located at NASA's base in Silicon Valley, and its mission is this. In 10 years, they aim to help create ideas that can improve the lives of 1 billion people worldwide. They nurture and support individuals who are working toward that goal. It's a grand vision. And that made me realize being smart isn't the issue. This is truly something great. It's not about being good at studying or getting perfect scores to get into Seoul National University. What really matters is thinking about how to do meaningful work that benefits humanity. That, I realized, is true intelligence. I've seen a lot of people like that. That made me reflect a lot on myself. And then I started thinking, how should I raise my child? While I was working there, I kept worrying. I thought, I'm struggling here, dealing with my not so great English, working hard. How long can I keep doing this? At that point, Google had an internal network called AGN.
Asian?
AGN stands for Asian Group Network. It's a community of Asian employees that includes around 10,000 members. Since Google has well over 100,000 people worldwide, that's a fairly large group.
Oh, so about 1/10 of the total is Asian.
Oh, there are quite a lot of them. Indians, then Koreans, Chinese, Japanese, tons of people, including Filipinos and so on. And the company provides support for these groups. If you're doing some kind of research or project, the company actually provides funding. And I was lucky enough to work on a project with my mentee. The topic we chose was, why is it that people from CJK, China, Japan, Korea, and also from Singapore and Taiwan don't seem to succeed as much in Silicon Valley? But there was one part we kept in parentheses, something we didn't say out loud to others. Why don't we succeed as much as the Indians?
A bunch of big tech CEOs these days are Indian.
They're huge CEOs, like at Microsoft, Google. Most of the big tech companies are led by Indian executives now.
But if you compare by country, places like China, Japan, and Korea aren't behind India at all. In fact, they're often wealthier.
Right, so we thought, why is that? And decided to dig into it. We pitched the idea to the company and got $300,000 in funding.
From the company?
Yep, the company funded it. So the project kicked off, and I ended up being selected as the representative for Korea. I was the one who raised my hand and got it started. The Japanese reps were mostly in their late 40s to early 50s, people who had already climbed just about as high as they could. They didn't really have anywhere else to go. So in a way, they were people who had lived intensely goal-driven lives, but now found themselves a bit aimless. There was this sense of emptiness. Still, they were all high performers in their own fields. Over the course of 3 months, we brought in professors, consultants, even executive coaches, and had deep discussions. And after those 3 months, I came to a conclusion. I'd say there are 3 main reasons behind all this. The first one is deference to authority. Authority means hierarchy, and deference is like submission or reverence. So basically, a cultural tendency to submit to authority. And when I mentioned this, leaders from nearly all 10 countries involved literally started clapping. They all said, that's it, that's exactly it. What I mean is this. Some of the professors asked us directly, how did you end up here at the headquarters of a world-class company like Google? And almost everyone gave the same kind of answer. I studied really hard. I wanted to work for the best company. Then they were asked, but why? And nearly 100% of them said something like, I wanted to be a son my parents could be proud of, a husband to be proud of, a respected senior, a father my kids could be proud of. But here's the thing. In a room full of incredibly smart people, no one mentioned what they wanted.
Not my goal.
It wasn't really their goal. It was more like, how will other people see me? Like, my dad says I should major in computer science. And the response is, gotta be number 1. They've just been running toward that non-stop. So what happens is, even at work, when a boss gives them a clear goal, they charge ahead, get it done, and say, here it is. They get recognized for that, and that's how they made it all the way to Google. Even back in their home country, that's what got them noticed. But once they got to HQ, the game was totally different. And that's when they hit a wall, because with that mindset, you just can't move up into leadership. Even when they realize it, it's really hard to change.
It's not about blaming others, more like looking back on themselves.
Yeah, it really became a moment of self-reflection, and for me, that still really sticks with me to this day.
The second reason they mentioned was relationship building. Now, at first you might think, wait, who's better at building relationships than Asians? It sounds a bit counterintuitive, right?
We're great at gathering, right?
People think there's warmth, that there's this strong sense of connection. But then we look at it from a sociological perspective, working with a sociologist. Turns out when people evaluate others, they usually look at two things. First, they look at whether the person is warm. Are they kind, approachable? Second, they assess competency. Does this person actually know what they're doing? And they don't do this equally. People tend to judge warmth first, then competence. So if you break it down, you get 4 combinations, right? Now, this isn't a blanket statement, but based on that study, where do you think Asians tended to fall on that spectrum?
Well, I mean, Asians often win things like math competitions, so you'd assume they land on the competent side and maybe also seen as warm or kind, right?
Yeah, on average, the way we see it, we'd place ourselves in that warm and competent category. I mean, our literacy rate is low. Everyone goes through mandatory education. So there's no real debate about being smart. But the question is, are we seen as warm? Think about it from a Western perspective. How might we come across to them? We don't smile that much for starters. Our facial expressions aren't always the friendliest. And if you look at it through their lens, our eyes might come off as a bit sharp or intense, and even when we bump into someone on the street, we often don't say sorry or anything.
Yeah, that's just how it is. It's the usual way.
So, from their point of view, we come off as really cold. And that's where this gap shows up between how they see us and how we see ourselves. But flip it around for a second. If someone's super smart and cold, how does that feel to you?
Feels a bit arrogant, right?
And if they're not your friend, they feel more like a threat. Pretty intimidating.
Oh, for sure. Totally.
It's just hard to become real friends, which means it's tough to break into the main circle. The third one is something called vulnerability. Now, it's a bit hard to translate cleanly into Korean, but if you go by the dictionary, vulnerable means having weaknesses or being exposed. So in IT terms, vulnerable means being open to things like viruses or outside attacks. But when we're talking about people, it's different. It's about the courage to show your weaknesses. That's what vulnerability really means. Not just having weaknesses, but being willing to let others see them.
When I show my weaknesses, can I avoid getting hurt?
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're talking about. So then what about Asians? How do you think we tend to handle vulnerability?
I'd say not very well.
Exactly. We're not good at it. And there's a reason. Showing weakness is actually really risky. Because if you show it and someone hits you right there, that's it. You're done. So when someone shows vulnerability, what they're really doing is saying, I trust you. But that kind of openness doesn't really exist socially. And if you had to sum up Asian culture in one word, it's all about saving face. You act like you have it together, even if you don't. You pretend to know things, avoid asking questions. It's all part of the same mindset. And because we struggle with vulnerability, we feel the need to hide our weaknesses. So what happens? How do we end up behaving?
We only show what we want others to see.
Exactly. We filter everything. And anything that feels risky or has a chance of failure, we just avoid it altogether. Stick to the safe bets. The safest route? Study hard, pass the civil service exam, get into a company like T Corp, but starting something new, where you might end up broke or in debt. In a society like this, that's a huge risk. You fail once, and you're branded as the guy who couldn't make it. And in this kind of culture, bouncing back, that's really tough. There are all these factors that end up shaping the society. And over time, I was hoping things in Korea would have gotten a bit better, that it had become a more livable place. But instead, it feels like things have only gotten harder for young people, and that's really disheartening. What we need are better systems, more support structures. Things like regulations need to be loosened up in a more forward-thinking, flexible way. That's the kind of shift I think we need to see.
Right. Funny how the conversation unfolded. We started with how you ended up in Silicon Valley, and somehow we found ourselves talking about government and society. Now, to wrap up this long and thoughtful conversation, let's say not just juniors in the sense of rank, but anyone coming up after you. And since you're such a respected voice in HR, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share? Maybe something about Korean company culture or our workplace systems in general, something you've been reflecting on.
It's nothing grand, really, just something that's closely tied to what I studied, and actually the direction I'm heading with my work these days too. I just hope people can be a bit more positive, that they can dream a little more. I mean, sure, analysis is important. And honestly, we already have the tools and the intelligence to do that really well. But the problem is, we don't dream enough. We get stuck in the present or even the past. And when that happens, it's really hard to feel happy. That's why I really hope young people growing up now and startup founders who are out there building new organizations can allow themselves to dream big, not just survive, but really dream. What does it mean when we say the world has changed? It means if you can dream big, the how part is already out there. Like take AI, for example. You don't have to build everything from scratch. All the APIs and tools are already available. And it's not just the tech. There's so much funding and capital floating around in the market right now. So really all you need is the dream. There's an abundance of funding, talent, and technology out there. It's all within reach. So what I really hope, personally, is that leaders, founders, and team members within organizations can start creating environments where people feel free to dream. That kind of culture, I think, is what we really need going forward.
Thank you so much. Dreaming big means you're also ready to work for it. And when you put in that effort, I really believe those dreams can come true. You talked about that 3-year resume idea earlier.
It's not just about having a grand vision, but breaking it down into what you need to build step by step every few years. And not doing it alone, getting feedback along the way. If you keep moving forward like that, I honestly think you won't just end up at Google. You could end up at Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, anywhere. Thank you again, CEO Hwang. Hope you'll join us again sometime.
No, if you invite me again, I'd be more than happy to come back.
Thank you so much for taking the time today, and thank you for all the great insights. That was CEO Hwang. Thank you again.
Thank you.